morning, afternoon, and this evening. So yes, thank you so much for your patience. Welcome to those that are obviously watching on the live stream, and welcome to all in person. Of course, this is Black History Month, week 3 event, which is centered around anti-racism. So my name is Nadine. I'm the anti-racism officer at Brunel University, and I'm also an anti-racism activist. So I'm known for being organiser of the event, and that's how I tend to introduce myself. A bit of both Brunel and activism and protesting. So today, of course, we have an amazing panel, as you can see. We'll be delving into quite a special debate or conversation, discussion, roundtable discussion as I like to call it. And we'll be talking about topics such as racism within society in the current climate. We'll be talking about Black History Month, talking about Black Lives Matter, and we'll also be talking about institutionalised racism, decolonising the system, and the rewarding gap. So those are our topics. Now, as you can see, we've got an incredible panel. Thank you again for your patience. You're all here, which is amazing, even better. What I will do is I probably will not do them justice by introducing them myself, so I'm going to let them do it. So, Jason, you can start. We do have some microphones. If you wouldn't mind, when you're talking, if you've got a loud voice like me, it's fine. Okay. You've got a microphone, so please go around and just introduce yourselves for me, panelists, if you wouldn't mind.
That's great. Can anyone hear me?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Good evening, everyone. How are you all keeping?
Good
Stuff. It's really, really good to be here. Really good to be here. And thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Just simply, my name's Jason, and I'm really looking forward to learning from your good selves and fantastic people on the panel. Thank you.
Jason, tell us that.
I'm a professor at University of Glasgow, Professor of Sociology of Education.
Thank you very much, Jason.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'm Gordon Stewart. I'll start by saying that my parents came here in 1957 and they spent 10 years, and then they returned to their home country, which was Guyana. So hence my accent, even though I was born here. And then I returned back in the 80s as a student. And I live in the community of High Wycombe, and I've been active in pioneering Black History Month in the community. When we started Black History Month, people thought, well, what's that, Black what? You know? And then I'm also been involved in the last 20 years in a supplementary school, a Saturday school. So that's me for now.
Hi everyone, my name is Chinedu. I am a lecturer in biosciences at Brunel University, based in the medical school. I'm quite new to Brunel. I joined in May, so it's an absolute honour to be part of this panel with these amazing people.
I got my own microphone. I'm usually professor. Sure. My name is Zephaniah, and I'm a poet, writer, musician, and I also lecture here at Brunel University in performance poetry and sometimes writing for young adults. And I guess I think I'm probably the oldest one on the panel. But I've been an activist since the kind of late 70s, and in one form or another. And I live in the Gaskell building down the road.
My name is Sophie Holder. I work at Montfort University. I'm an executive officer in the EDI department. I've been in higher education now for about 18 months. Before that, I was in the charity sector, and I worked in international development. Before that, I worked in the NHS for a bit. And I guess my passion when I'm not at work and doing stuff with anti-racism and equality, diversity, inclusion. I'm also finishing up my master's, which is submitted on Monday. So I'll be working on that on the way back up. Got my laptop with me, and I also like to do some online things as well. So some podcasts and things online. You won't be able to find me, it's a different name, but I do that as well.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, panelists. So before we get started, I just want to say, firstly, it's really important that we're all here celebrating Black History Month, and that's why I just have to say thank you again for being here. It starts with that enthusiasm, it starts with the passion, and it starts by showing up, right? And this is how we start to kind of get that momentum, and then hopefully over time, all of these seats will be filled, and that's the aim. So yes, thank you very much for showing up. I actually just wanted to read something on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor. Thank you very much, Sergeant, wherever you are, for grabbing that for me in terms of the statement from the Vice-Chancellor. So I'm just going to read that out now. So, this year marks the 30th anniversary of Black History Month in the UK, which gives everyone the opportunity to share, celebrate, and understand the impact of Black heritage and culture. One of my priorities is to continue to create an inclusive university that enables everyone to reach their full potential and to feel respected and valued regardless of their race or ethnicity. Here at Brunel, we are hugely proud of our diversity, and indeed, we are now in the world's top 20 internationally focused institutions and fourth in the UK, according to the Times Higher Education University Rankings, the 2023 league table, which was just released. Can I get a round of applause for that? Fourth in the UK, I'm just going to say it again, fourth in the UK, and we are in the world's top 20 internationally focused institutions, just so you know. So, thank you. So our support for our activities like the excellent programme events that is currently underway to celebrate Black History Month, celebrating diversity, gives us a tangible way to demonstrate our pride in our Black community, and I urge you all to take part. So again, this is from Andrew Jones, the Vice-Chancellor and President, and again, a big thank you to you all. So, we are going to get started straight away. My lovely colleague has actually got the box as well, so if there are any questions, what I'll do is I'll open up the floor, thank you, right, that was a bit of interest out there right now. Any questions that you have, Ashley will throw the catch box at you, which doesn't hurt you. And then we can get some questions going for each topic. So with that said, I'm going to start with our first question. So I'd like to get everyone a bit vulnerable, see, so I'm going to start with something nice and personal. So intro question for you all. Have you personally experienced racism, and if so, what happened? How has it affected you and shaped your identity and sense of self? Alright, so what I'll do is I'll open it up. If anyone wants to lead, they can. If not, I'll just ask someone random. Benjamin, you're smiling there.
I'm smiling because I've just experienced so much racism in my life. Which one do I choose? And you know what? I'm going to choose.
Yeah.
Sorry, my personal microphone and I'm not using it. I'm going to choose two if I can, very quickly. And they're both when I'm very small. Very, very small. One was my first day in school. I have a twin sister. Not a lot of people know that. So me and my twin sister arrived at the school. And there was things that were said to us that were obviously racist, you know, where you come from, you know, you speak good English, all that kind of stuff. But the thing that I remember most was in the assembly, when all the children were in the school, and the teacher said, to celebrate the arrival of the dark children, tomorrow we're all going to bring in our favourite gollywogs. Seriously. Yeah, that's what happened. And the next day, all the children brought in their favourite gollywogs. And in those days, gollywogs were everywhere. They were on jam jars, they were in dolls, you know. And me and my poor sister, the kids were coming up to us, do your dad look like this? Does he smile like this? So, I remember that really well, and I must have been 5, because it was my first day at school. But when I was about 8 years old, I was walking home from school, and a boy came behind me on a bicycle, and he had a brick in his hand, and he slapped the back of my head with the brick. I mean, it's worse than having it thrown, you know, because the momentum. To this day, I've got the scar. And he said, I've told this story a lot in the media, and usually I kind of told it down, but I'm not going to do it now. He said, fuck off home, you black bastard. And poor little me, I went home to my mum, And the thing that confused me the most was, why would he want me, why is he telling me to go home? I was going home anyway. I mean, you know what I mean? Little me, I was trying to think, why is he hurrying me to go home? I was going home anyway.
Yeah.
And my mum had to explain to me that he means something else.
Yeah.
And this is it's a very difficult thing to talk about this, but because my poor mother, she's very sick at the moment, but she has a very colonial attitude to some of these things, you know, and also her religion. And I remember saying, Mother, what can we do about this? And she said, don't worry, son, we are good Christians. When we die, we're going to go to heaven. There's going to be no racism. So I was like, Mum, we have to wait till I'm dead. You know? And, you know, she's 88 now. And not so long ago, she was, and this is very interesting, I think, in terms of the discussion we're going to have today. She was complaining about a particular minority group in Britain. And I said to her, Mother, I mean, I've never heard you. I've heard you complain about the Pakistanis and the Indians and the Turks and this, that, and the other. I've never heard you complain about white people. And she went, no, I never would. We are guests in their country. We are guests here. And I had to explain to her that I'm not a guest.
Yeah.
But, you know, she came here when she was a teenager. And she still feels like she's a guest here. So, sorry, I've taken up a lot of time, but those are my two first experiences of racism.
And how did those experiences shape you? So, for example, let's just talk really quickly on the break. I mean, did you understand what was happening? Did you understand why the person had the break? Did you know what was happening? Like, what was that experience like for you?
Well, my mother had to explain to me that there were people that wanted me to go back to my country, and I, even at that age, I knew that this was my country. But I'll never forget it because it was like my awakening.
Yeah.
My awakening. If you like, the school experience was the subtle racism. I call it subtle. But the real racism, well, the violent racism, was my introduction to it was that little. It was only a little kid that did it to me as well. It wasn't like a big man that did it. So it got me asking questions, and it probably, in some way, helped kind of me become the person I am today when it comes to fighting racism and being aware of it. Especially for my mother. You were on a program yesterday, and you were talking about black people who say I've never experienced racism. I mean, my mother has experienced so much racism. I've been with her in the shop. I remember being with her in the shop, and a lady came in. My mother was just about to be served, and this woman came in and said, "Hey, Ethel, you're not going to serve that nigger before me, are you?" And Ethel said, "Of course not," you know. And she served the right lady. So I've seen my mother experience racism, but ask her, and she'll say no.
No. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, no. So.
Why do you think that is? I mean, let's just open that up. I find that really, really interesting. So, obviously, as we know, black people are not a monolith, right? So we all have different experiences, different views, different ideologies. And typically for me, when I think of the black community, I would naturally think that most people, if not all of us, have had to contend with some type of racism, whether it be overt, for example, the brick, whether it be covert, subtle, as Benjamin mentioned, or institutionalised. And then some people obviously say that they haven't. They've never experienced it. And I listened to Jason yesterday, a question was asked, Tuesday, a question was asked, a very good question by Sergio about why is it that some people potentially, again, from marginalised communities, may not be open about or may not feel that they've experienced racism, even though many people believe it's so prevalent. Have you noticed that? Have you come across many people, for all of you, have you come across many black and brown people that have obviously said that they haven't experienced racism? Is that something that you can believe, or is it something that you find hard to believe? What do you think? Jason, that was technically for you.
Microphone.
Yes, please. Thank you.
It's a difficult one. I guess people kind of experience things in different ways, and that's kind of the most important thing. And I think, weirdly, you can actually neutralise someone's experience by telling them something that they haven't experienced. So if someone actually says, I haven't experienced racism, I may subjectively feel that actually you may have done, but you might not know. But there is a condescending paradox in having that conversation with someone when they're kind of saying, actually, I don't believe I have. That being said, I think racism as an instrument, it's so effective and so sophisticated that very often when people do experience racist incidents, even people who are cognizant of racism and its experiences and its detrimental effect, sometimes you don't realise it until a couple of days later. You know? So, but I guess what builds over time is that kind of residual scarring, and it is these kind of little inflictions, and that's what it's designed to do. It's really sophisticated, it's becoming more and more sophisticated. So to actually name that is actually a difficult thing in the first place. And I think the secondary aspect of that is recognising that people come or arrive at that destination at different times, and I always try and be careful not to tell people, I think you've experienced racism. What I do try and do is if I observe that, then I actually may intervene. But it's quite interesting because you speak to people who may be of colour, who have a particularly conservative disposition, and very often when you speak to people of that persuasion, they'll often say, I've not experienced racism. You know, Britain's a very equitable, post-racial egalitarian society, and in reality it isn't. But is it my position to say, you're wrong? You know, and the one thing that my dad has always said, I've got three brothers, and he's always said, he's like, Jason, you've got great temperament for racism. You're not like me. My dad's South African, and so his experience of racism is uniquely different. And he always says, like, you know, sometimes I question if you're my son because you don't have that that anger towards it. But he's always kind of said you've got the right temperament for racism, and I guess it's more that idea of trying to think objectively, because I think one of the most to white people who engage in racist endeavour, one of the most predictable retorts to it is a radical approach. So if racism is able to manifest and change itself and reincarnate itself in all these different ways, but we use the same approaches to address that problem, I think it's kind of recognising that there's a broad church of approaches we could take, radicalism being one of them, or radical approach, but there are other approaches which I think it's pretty hard to judge that algorithm. And I think it's very hard to slip the punch you can't see coming. So I think, you know, lining up different shots, so to speak, I think is the best way to address racism. And I think going with a straight down the pipe is the one we've used since the time of Moore, but the problem is racism is becoming more sophisticated, so it becomes really hard to slip that punch, and then what you end up with is kind of, like I mentioned before, punch drunk people. Because, you know, there's only so much of that you can take, and it is difficult, but I do think it's important that we don't buy into this idea of, you know, someone, I don't know who's written it, but someone's written a brilliant piece called Dear Uncle Quasi. It's brilliant. It's brilliant, and basically the point of it is to remind him that you're black, and at some point you forgot that. Now I think the way it's been written is quite carefully curated, but it doesn't actually do the job of saying, actually, because you're black, you need to behave like this. It reminds him that Boris Johnson can commit offence after offence after offence, and you made one error, and the error you made wasn't actually your error, it was an mistrust error, and you've paid the consequence for it has been pretty grave, because the only reason you take the job as Exchequer of the Chancellor, or Chancellor of the Exchequer, is because ultimately one day you have the ambition to hold the premiership, and now that will never happen.
No, I think that's really good examples. I mean, let's just, again, just a quick show of hands. Please raise your hand. Have you experienced racism? Okay, so all of us, right? Okay. Would you like to tell us if you can keep it under...
I'd like to start by saying that it's a matter of awareness. There's people especially of African descent, and probably Asian descent, that are not really aware of it. So there are things, like Benjamin was saying earlier, that wake you up to it, and some people are not sensitive to that waking up. because, well, I guess about the same time in the 60s, right? When I first went to school, the first thing when I was welcome in the playground was nigger, nigger, pull the trigger, bang, bang, bang. That was what I was welcomed with. And, but of course, coming from a strong, loving Caribbean home, you know, I was able to. I've always been someone that, like I fought my own battles. I never went home and complained to my mom and dad and that. But what I found is that in order to like survive the playground and the school, I hung out with the real rough guys. Right? So the guys that were going into Woolworths and shoplifting matchbox cars and all that sort of thing. So I guess probably that's why my dad spent 10 years in there. Right? The other thing is the subtle racism, because when I was between jobs, I worked as a testing engineer and went for an interview, and among all the different questions, the interviewer said, "What's the coolest thing you've ever done?" So, you know, and it just came out the blue like that. It could be a genuine question, but I asked myself, well, after the interview, did he ask everybody else that? So it's things like that, the subtle. Anyway, I'll let the ladies speak now.
Thank you for sharing. I think for me personally, I wouldn't say I've experienced like overt or violent racism, thankfully, because when I hear your experiences, I'm just shocked, and it's heartbreaking to hear. I think the first experience I can remember is when I was working as a charity fundraiser. You know, the people on the street that are trying to fundraise money that you always walk past, and you know, they're trying to get your money to get you to sign up for a charity. I was one of those. And yeah, I just remember approaching one lady, like, I don't know, maybe she was in her 60s, 70s. You know, I think we were raising money for an animal charity. And I did my spiel, and then she was like, she came right up close to my face and was like, "Go back to your own country." And I was like, wow. And I just broke down crying, because up to that point, I had never experienced anything like that. Yeah, I've had disagreements as a child. I've had people not like me for my personality, but I think I don't know, especially like the age difference as well. I don't even know, but like, you really threw me off. And yeah, I think that was like a really painful experience for me. And then there's the other more subtle kind of situations where people are like, oh, like, where do you come from? You know, when I say Britain or I say London, and they're like, oh, but where do you really come from?
And they look so disappointed.
Yeah.
It's I've been told, you know, where are you from? And then I say Peckham. And then, no, actually it's Peckham. And they say, where are you from? And I say, England. And the face genuinely drops. They're really expecting me to say something really fantastic. I should say I'm from Jamaica, I should say I'm from Nigeria, and I do. But I start with Britain. So I love the fact that you said that, sorry.
Yeah. That's, I mean, like, my name is a big giveaway. Like, my name is Chinedu, it's a Nigerian name, if you didn't know. But yeah, so there's always like that digging deep, and some people are just not satisfied with the first answer. But then even with my name as well, so I don't have an English name at all, my parents didn't give me any. Yeah, just that whole, I think there was one time we were doing introductions, meet and greet, at the beginning of my PhD, and I introduced myself, and then one Greek guy was like, what kind of name is that? And I was like, blimey, how do I respond to that? And yeah, just subtle things like that. But yeah, I think just similar to what you're saying, Gordon, like, just, I would say my family and my community have been so affirming in my life in terms of my identity. Also, I'm a Christian, so my faith has also been a big factor in just knowing who I am and knowing like what to filter out and what to take in. So, yeah.
Thank you. Really appreciate you sharing that. Sophie, can you tell us?
It's just so interesting hearing what everybody's saying, because when you asked the question, I was thinking, when have I experienced racism? When have I experienced racism? And I think, as you were saying, I've experienced probably more so overt. But I know you said just now, not violent, but I think all forms of racism are violent, even if they are overt. And I think that's the way it can get us in society when we think about covert racism as the only form of violence, because it's hurting our physical body, where all of these other things also have an impact on us as well, the overt forms. So I similarly worked in selling things on the street. I sold Empower Energy, and which I think might have gone bust now with the housing and heating crisis. But I remember getting my spiel for Empower, like you said, and then this guy would just randomly walk past, and it must have been when Barack was just got into power, and he was like, just because Barack has come into power, that doesn't mean anything, you're still S. And it was just so, it caught me so unawares, because basically it's a job. Even though we can find those people on the street irritating, we're doing our jobs, they're doing their jobs, and you don't expect that when you're in work. You expect to be working like everybody else in a professional setting and just to kind of carry on with your job. And I remember crying as well, and I'm not necessarily that sort of person that will probably cry for something like that. And I remember telling my manager at the time, who was white, and she was like, you can't take it personally. People say all sorts of things, it's not that big a deal, you just got to wash it off, and just had that disconnect that she just didn't understand why it was so hurtful that someone had said that. And I think the other form of racism that I think I experience probably more often is just a constant underestimating of my skills and my ability, intelligence. And I think that's what I've had in various jobs that I've experienced, that they just not thinking that you can probably do as much, or surprised or shocked. And I guess it's probably no surprise that I'm probably in one of the best working environments now, but I have a manager of colour for the first time. So the dynamic has completely shifted in terms of appreciation, workload, protection when things are going on. So those are the forms that I've experienced.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really interesting hearing the stories. I'm just going to throw this out there, and I'm going to ask just a couple of you so we can get through my very interesting questions. First question for you: is England racist? So I've heard every single person, you've all heard every single person, not me, but let's just say that another time, talk about an experience of racism. So the question for you all, have a think: is England a racist country? And if so, why? So let's ask you something. Yeah, I'm going to ask you. I'm curious as to what you think. Do you think England is a racist country? Yes or no?
I would say yes.
And why?
Because I think institutionally, that the way the systems have been put together, the way they've been made up, it hasn't been in a way to support, develop, encourage people who aren't of the Eurocentric background, in my opinion. I think it goes down to the very systems, and I think it'd be very easy for me to kind of answer that question in terms of racist, in terms of, yeah, Boris or this person or that person, but we're thinking about fundamentally how the system is geared in terms of progression in any sort of environment. There is that lack of equity. And I think also, if we're thinking again, and I know hopefully we have time to touch on it, but within the education sector, when we're talking about decolonising, when we're talking about anti-racism, it's not just the change in the program, the change in the curriculum. You're saying we need to get down to the very bottom of it, or the way that these institutions have been put together, because they haven't put together in a way to understand difference, diversity, or the various forms that come in, or how to cater to that, or how to include that in order to make your institution a better function and to work for everybody.
Excellent. So Jason, do you agree with that? With your skills that you've got on just there. Do you agree? So Sophie has ultimately said that it is. In other words, it's racism is firmly interwoven in society due to institutions and historical context and education considerations, but all of which I think it's safe to say Sophie thinks do you agree?
Yeah, I concur with Sophie. I mean, there's two things. Britain was always, or England, has always had an irrational fear for the best part of 100 years of black people. probably crystallised by the Good and Rush generation and how they've encountered suffering in particular in other black and ethnic minority groups. And I think that there's a nostalgia that a lot of white Britons hold in terms of the past as being the glory years. You know, when their parents all really kind of had teeth in society, and you know, the Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell really held a lot of weight, and the rejection of that in more recent times as society recognises some of the problems with racism, and also the resistance movements, imperial movements and movements in the 80s, and the pushback from amazing people like Benjamin Zephaniah, FL. That had a huge impact on how we kind of conceptualise these things. So I think the thing that it's gravitating more towards now is I keep coming back to is the sophistication. It's a lot harder to kind of illuminate, and with that you're in a situation where, as you've always had to be, continuously prove that racism exists, and that's what you're asked to do now. You're asked to prove that that happens. So if you go to HR, and we have these really poor mechanisms in HR, you say I've experienced racism, the cyclical, idiotic process of that is that you actually end up going back to the person, your line manager, who's probably the offender. So it kind of illustrates kind of where we are, and unfortunately, as Sophie kind of aptly said, it's so interwoven and crystallised within our laws, our legislations, our institutions. It's actually a very hard thing to unwind and to kind of dismantle in some respects.
Benjamin, do you agree with that?
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes, I don't find anything there I disagree with. I do, when you say, the way you put the question was, do you think England is racist? And I automatically thought, what do you mean? Do you mean Britain? Do you mean Great Britain? Or do you just mean England? I mean, have you looked at the national anthem? Most people know the first verse, but the next goes on about killing the Scotch people. And I always have a problem using the term either UK, United Kingdom, because we're not united. I mean, especially now we're very divided. And I also have a problem with the word great. Because what is so great is a term that's kind of, I don't know when it came to use, but I'm guessing it had something to do with empire.
It did indeed.
But I think Britain is racist because so many of its institutions are built on racism, and racism that people just don't want to confront. Their heroes, people like Winston Churchill, are deeply racist. Lots of other faults with him if you're a woman and all kinds of things, but deeply racist. But he's a hero of the establishment. Anybody that's heard me speak before will hear me. I'm going to repeat something I say all the time now. If I say England is racist, it doesn't mean like everybody, every white person in England is racist and needs to be condemned. I was born sexist. My father had a very low view of women, which he tried to teach to me, and my uncles were the same. And at one point in my life, I went, right, I'm going to change, I'm going to do something different, and I'm going to learn how to respect women. But every now and again, I do something sexist, or I have sexist thoughts. I'm not perfect. I'm working on it, but it doesn't mean that I am a bad human being. So the body politic of the country is one thing, and the people who live in the country. I remember when I was going to do my poetry in the 80s, I had a poem called I Don't Like Miss Thatcher. And I was on the side of the stage, and I was going to go on the stage, and my mother said, please, son, don't do that poem about Miss Thatcher. And I said, why not? She said, look at all the white people. I said, just white people don't like Thatcher either. But, if we don't recognise the racism in the country, how are you going to deal with it? If we don't, if a man doesn't recognise the sexism that kind of he's learned, he's inherited, how is he going to deal with that?
Yeah, spot on. That actually leads me to my next question. I mean, I always talk about this. So when it comes to racism within institutions, which includes, for example, the Met, we often hear the term a few bad apples. Okay, so that's a term that has been thrown around, I kid you not, for decades, and it's always referred to when it comes to all institutions within England. Okay, so there are a few bad apples. So that basically means that racists are the minority and not the majority. Chinedu, do you think that's true? Racists are the minority and not the majority. There are just a few bad apples. So bad apples in higher education, bad apples in policing, bad apples around the corner when you have to deal with racism. There's just bad apples everywhere. Do you think that's true?
A lot of bad apples.
Yeah, a lot of bad apples.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I do believe there are bad apples in institutions. Whether they're the majority, I don't know. But it just depends on their level of influence, because if there could be a handful of them, but they have a high level of influence and power, they can almost distort the reputation of the whole institution and overshadow the goods that the majority are doing.
Mm-hmm.
So, those few bad apples, they need to be uprooted and destroyed, really, and taken away.
Do you think it's used as an excuse, though? So, for example, when everything goes wrong, so for example, I always love using the Met. That has been their go-to statement for about, 20 or 30 years, maybe even longer, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And so they've been saying for 30 years, there's just bad apples.
Yeah.
So there was bad apples 10 years ago, there's bad apples last week, and it's just bad apples. Is that an excuse? I mean, what do you reckon?
Accountability.
Bad tree.
I don't think
Bad tree?
I definitely agree with that. But I think also we're not rooting out the bad
Apples.
Because the point is, everyone has worked in an organisation, and you can have a few people that don't have a team mentality, who don't want to work towards the same goal or aim. They can derail the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So saying that there's only a couple, but the majority, the couple can still cause the problem. And I think in a lot of institutions, they're not rooted out. It's kind of like, well, there's only a few, the majority can kind of overrule that. You can't pull in two different directions, and it's always easier to pull down than it is to pull up. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that I see in terms of institutions. I saw someone put on Twitter recently who was working for not any of the universities here, but someone left the university and they were talking about just the awful experience they had in the PhD program, how there was constant bullying going on. They went through all the protocols. This was a white guy who went through all the protocols, but eventually they just didn't do anything, because the point was the researcher who was his supervisor was bringing in a lot of money. He's a big name, he brings in a lot of money, and if you work in higher education, you understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You understand what that means, that, well, we can sacrifice a few students because he's going to bring in millions of pounds.
Yeah.
And then you have this dynamic again when you're allowing the situation to continue because you feel like the payout is bigger than the people that it's affecting, but it's never bigger than the people. And I think that's where the problem is for me.
I think you hit the nail on the head. I have to add to that because there's a report that came out recently, the Met report. Did you hear about it? The recent Met report that came out? And so there was an investigation of the Met after, obviously, the murder of Sarah Everard. They went into the Met to basically establish what was happening, institutionalised racism, kind of looking at the disparities and the issues. And then they basically realised that they had kept on all of these different police officers who had been racist over the years. So they never were fired. So if someone was racist 10 years ago, they were still kind of perpetuating that same behaviour year on, year out. And that's a really good example of what you were saying about not rooting out these so-called bad apples. So thank you for that point. Please.
I just want to say something very quickly. Just an experience I had not so long ago. I live in a really small village. They don't have a race problem. But there's a guy there. He was a mechanic, and he was like a part-time police officer, and he's now a full-time police officer. But I was there with him one day, and there was something on the news about some crime that had been committed. And they said the person's name was Abdul. So the mechanic, part-time police officer, said to me, jokingly, or said to the group of people that were there, why are you always called Abdul or Mohammed? And I said to him, that's really ignorant. Why are you called John or Peter?
Yeah, it's true. That is true.
I mean, I had to explain to him religious, and even people who are not religious, they have religious names. If you're Jewish, you're going to have a Jewish name, and You know, and I felt if me, as just the guy he's serving in the car, in the garage, has to teach him that,
Yeah.
and the police haven't taught him that.
We have an issue.
And
Real
he's
big
going to
issue.
go out and police us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What does that say about the police force? When it comes to police, I mean, I'm not really going to talk much, but the racism I experienced with police back in the 70s and 80s was terrible. I tell you, I mean, it was really bad. And the National Front on the streets as well. And after the National Front beat you up, you couldn't go to the police because they protected them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when we talk about racism now being more sophisticated, it's very true. Not so long ago, I did a TV program with some members of UKIP, and I looked at their security, and it was one of those situations where I knew that guy. Where do I know him from? Where do I know him from? And then I realised they were all the NF folks that I used to fight on the streets of the East End.
Wow.
You know, now they put on a suit,
Mm-hmm.
and they're being security
Mm-hmm.
to UKIP and people like that. And sometimes when it comes to talking about the racism that we experienced, even now with some young black people, they don't understand what it's like to just, when you leave a club, you can't just leave a club and go home. You have to have a plan. You have to have a strategy. Who's going to walk who home? Who's got taxi fare? Who's got this? Because there was a gang of NF people waiting for you. And like I said, you couldn't go to the police either. Right? People don't really, it's hard for people to understand what that was like. And that's what we experience now. But the racism, what we experienced then, but the racism that I come across now is administered by some people of that generation and some people younger, and they do it from their desk. You know, they administer their racism from their office. So it hasn't gone away. It has become, it's terrible to use the word sophisticated when it comes to racism, but, you know, I don't know if you ever saw the BNP leak. Did you ever see that leak? And there was this leak of all these BNP names, and you look at it, it's like councillor, you know, mayor, shoe shine. I mean, it was the whole world was there. You think, are these the real racist people that are hiding in plain sight? And they are giving us houses, they're building our roads, they're doing all kinds of things.
Yeah.
The struggle has just gone to another level. And in a way, I kind of, you know, I look at Jason and some other people, and I think, and yourself, what you're doing is really interesting, because when we were fighting racism, it was, we called it Babylon, we fight Babylon, right? We're fighting the system, and it was about the police and the NS. And there was only a few of us, people like Darcus Howe, who went and got a law degree. But there's only a few people that did that. Darcus Howe was able to go in court and just defend himself. But most of us were concerned, literally, with fistfights on the streets.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, how do we get home? How do we survive tomorrow?
And it's interesting because that, just to kind of echo what Benjamin was saying, the kind of process of racism, we've heard the term being used sophisticated, right? So what I call it is subtle. So we have overt racism, so obvious, deliberate and direct, which is the typical thing we think of when we think of a brick being hit by a brick. Then you have covert racism, which is racial prejudice that is subtle and discreet. And that's ultimately what we're referring to here, this sophisticated type of racism where it's really subtle, under the radar, you don't actually know it's happening, and it can be done really, really kind of subtly. So that's a really important point. But I have to move on because I need to answer this question. We have to get on to Black Lives Matter. So, quick question, all right? So many people would argue that the conversation centered around racism, anti-racism, and race equality has become increasingly polarized, e.g. anti-woke agenda, racism denial, and an increase on online racism and hate crimes. So, has the Black Lives Matter movement done more harm than good, or simply brought about underlying racism to the surface? Gordon, I'm going to give this one to you. What do you think? Has BLM made things better? Has it made it worse? Are we more polarized as a result?
Right. As I said earlier, it's the key word for me is awareness. What happened to George Floyd in America really brought about an international awareness as to what is happening to people, especially people of African descent in America. With the police brutality. But the thing is, when was that? 2 or 3 years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah, and then it suddenly waned.
Mm-hmm.
And now we've had the police killing of the young...
Chris Kaba.
Yeah, and we've heard the Black Lives Matter movement as organizations come up, but that kind of awareness, consciousness that we had a few years ago, it was gone because they were, I know in the Black Church they were meeting internationally to see what they can do to improve anti-racist work and everything, but it's sort of waned. But I think with the Black Lives Matter, if you allow me to say it, is that sometimes they say who pays the piper calls the tune, and I think because it's not actually funded by non-African people totally, I don't think it really gives the impetus that it should.
Okay. Do you agree, Chinedu? Do you think so? Did BLM make a difference for you? Is it good or bad? The movement. What do you think?
Okay.
And you've got to keep it under a minute because we're going to be here all day.
Okay. Okay. So in the year that it happened, I just remember being very overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the movement just highlighted discrimination and racism in many sectors.
So it brought it up. So it didn't bring up something that didn't exist. You're saying it brought it up to the surface.
Exposed in a lot of areas: film industry, education, healthcare, a lot of stuff that we already knew, but now the whole world knew, and it was just kind of concentrated, so just a lot at once.
Yeah.
The positives, I can say, there has been a lot of talk about EDI, following on, I feel, more so from 2020 onwards, more like scholarships and things for black people. There's 1,000 interns, there's a scheme like that. Lots of like business accelerator programs for black people. So I think it triggered a change. Yeah. But it's like, if not for the death of George Floyd, would this have happened? That's always the thought at the back of my head. Yeah. But that's the positive that I have seen so far. More opportunities created, more kind of talk about inclusion, diversity in the workplace.
Thank you. Jason, do you think that there's been any kind of confusion centred around Black Lives Matter? So, for example, do you think that there's been any kind of misconceptions when it comes to BLM and the movement and the organisations?
Yeah, I don't think there's been any misconceptions. I think it very much does what it says on the tin. I do think that, sadly, what BLM has fallen foul to is, I think, the dawn of celebrity. So, in Gordon and Benjamin's own time during their activism, there was a collectivism that was situated in cohesiveness and kind of strategy in terms of working as a collective. So not this kind of twitching fingers, but a collective fist. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of anti-racist endeavour, because we're playing to the piper and fundamentally have a lot of white people subsiding their guilt by donating to all these charities. The problem has been is that in many respects how people engage with those processes isn't always for the kind of reasons that I think they should be doing it. I think there's a lot of kudos that comes from positioning oneself really well within social media or social commentaries as an expert, and there's actually a lot of work that's kind of being duplicated, and I think that is the classic kind of effect of divide and conquer. It's working so well because that need for individualism, that seeking towards celebrity, I think has actually become more of a divisive thing. So I think BLM has been amazing, but I also think it's kind of given rise to that dawn of celebrity, and what would be really good is if we could learn some lessons from yesteryear and take some lessons from that kind of collective activism that I personally believe is situated in humility and integrity.
I agree with you, and it can be very complicated when you think about, again, the different ideologies within the movement. So just, again, to give everyone context, the BLM movement is associated with abolitionists and reformists. So I'm going to ask you, are you an abolitionist or a reformist? You've got to pick. You've got to pick. Black Lives Matter, what are you? Just quick and simple. Are you an abolitionist or are you a reformist? So would you like to abolish institutions because they are inherently racist, or would you like to reform, change them, work with them and make them better? What would you prefer, abolition or reform? Quick answer.
Abolition.
Abolition. What would you prefer, abolition or reform?
Yeah.
I am. I just bully abolition or
I'm an anarchist, so.
I knew he was going to say that.
But just what I want to say further, I mean, I just don't believe in the state. I think if you have power and you get power, there's always going to be somebody that wants to take power from you. And then you've got to build institutions to keep your power.
I agree.
If you look at society where, I mean, there's no states now, there's no governments that are anarchists, but there are people that live without government, and they're not looking for power. They're just looking to look after people. But that's another debate. I just want to say that Black Lives Matter. I agree with everything that's kind of said before. There's been this good and bad. But one thing I do know, I mean, I was at a Black Lives Matter march in London before George Floyd, and it was a majority black people. I went on one after George Floyd in Lincoln, and it was Spot the Black Person. You know, and these are young white people that really care. I mean, they were getting beat up by the police, and they don't live around black people. You know, I mean, they're in the university context, a lot of them in Lincoln University, but some of them are not. Some of them are just kind of local people who work in the farm, who were so outraged by what happened to George Floyd. And of course, it dies down a bit. You know, people go back to work, don't they, and all that kind of thing. But I think in terms of what people now call the woke generation, we used to say, you're conscious, you have to be conscious. That's what we used to say, right? You know, that man, they're conscious, that sister, they're conscious, right? But now they just call it woke.
Woke.
You know, and I remember somebody, I think it was a carver or somebody, who said, well, what's the opposite of conscious? It's being asleep. But we don't mean it like that. We mean rise up your conscience and understand racism in all its forms, and be aware of it so much that you understand that you can't just not like racism, you've got to be anti-racist. And that was what being conscious was. And you know, if that's woke, then that's fine. But yeah, anarchy in the UK.
Anarchy. All right, so we've got one abolitionist, one anarchist. What about you, Chinedu? If you had to pick abolition or reform, dismantle or rebuild and change? Reform?
Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Gordon?
I use the words of Malcolm X. He says, I just don't feel we should fight on one front. We need to fight on all fronts. So there's, from both of them, there can be approaches from both of them.
I like that. Jason?
Reform.
Reform. Thank you very much. Excellent. Okay, so with that said, we have to delve into, obviously, the main subject of Black Lives Matter was institutionalised racism, right? So, which is, in other words, a culture of prejudice. Okay, so institutionalised racism, as we know, is prevalent throughout society, whether it is in higher education, policing, whatever institution it is, there is racism and a culture of it. And this is what has led to conversations like decolonising the curriculum. So what I'd like to ask, and again, we've got to keep this really quick and simple, decolonising the curriculum, what does this term mean to you? Are there any benefits? And if so, what are they? So Sophie, I'm going to start with you. So what does decolonising the curriculum mean to you? And again, this is something that was spoken about as a result of institutionalised racism in higher education.
Decolonising the curriculum for me means bringing different forms of knowledge, understanding and ways of doing things in order to understand that there isn't just one way to do things, which is a Western Eurocentric way of understanding things. So whether that's teaching, assessments, pedagogy, all these various things that we feel like this is the right way. And I talk about that as somebody who comes from Caribbean parents who pushed education. Like that was the way that it was. We were all going to move us up a social class, the way we were going to provide for ourselves, that's the way we was going to get ahead. But even within that system, I have to understand that there are various different ways to do things, and it doesn't suit everybody. And there's so many other forms of learning and knowledge that could make us better. Every study shows that the more diverse you are, the more different aspects or viewpoints or worldviews you have, makes something better. And for me, that's what decolonizing is about. It isn't the way that the government is talking about it, which I find very painful, because I wouldn't even call myself woke, because I think the word has become such an
weaponized.
Because it's like, oh, the woke people, so you don't even want to associate yourself with it anymore because of what the new definition is, in my opinion. But the way that the government frames it is decolonizing is taken away from history and basically away from power. But the point is, it was all our history. It is all of our history. We've all contributed to these things. It was built on the backs of developing countries. Therefore, to now say that there is nothing that you can learn from them, you've gotten everything from them. So take the other forms of learning as well.
Thank you very much, Sophie. Benjamin?
I'm just going to try and keep it short. Decolonizing the curriculum.
What does it mean to you?
It means, in very simple terms, to stop educating our, not just in higher education, in school level as well, students through Eurocentric eyes only. You know, and stop making certain assumptions. A friend of mine once told me she was a student at another university, and she was doing anthropology, and the lecturer was telling her she went somewhere in the Andes or something like that. She climbed up this mountain to find these remote people, and she couldn't find them. And then she said, quite seriously to the class, that I did what any civilized person would do afterwards. So the student said, well, I went to the pub.
Yeah.
You know. And it's stuff like that. I mean, and this was a Muslim girl, you know, a hijabi as well. But it's, I think decolonizing the curriculum is it's a big job. I have a little poem, which I'm not going to perform now. It's in a book, and it's a poem I never really performed, but it's written as a letter. It's a children's poem to the teacher, saying, "Teacher, you know, why are you calling me this? You know, I come from a civilization that had 13 months in our year. When we went down the Nile, civilization started. You know, we had science and technology, and I'm paraphrasing. And then the last line is, so teacher, do not say Columbus discovered me. Check the great things I was doing before I suffered slavery." You know,
That's excellent.
And the amount of teachers that say to me, there's things they want to talk to the students about, but they can't do because it's not on the curriculum. So they give them my poem.
I like that.
Say to them, what is he talking about? They get around it that way.
I like that. Thank you very much. Chinedu, what does decolonizing the curriculum mean to you?
What does it mean to me? So as an educator, it means making what I teach and my students' learning experience more representative, more inclusive, like allowing them to see themselves, almost as their experiences reflected in my teaching. So, like as a scientist, like the images I use, kind of making sure I use different ethnicities, the kind of literature papers that I refer to, using diverse authors from different countries because we have a global cohort of students. You know, you were given stats at the beginning about 4 in the UK, and just things like that. And like one of the great things in 2020, that was released was this book called Mind the Gap, which was talking about dermatology and like just diagnosing skin conditions in people of different like skin complexions, and the fact that didn't exist or wasn't really there was shocking. Even like there's this illustrator as well who's showing like clinical images, but in black people, like what does a black fetus look like?
Yes,
like,
that went viral.
We never gone through life just seeing
not realizing it,
and Eurocentric lens, and a lot of that is changing. It is a big task, but it's not impossible, and I think the more and more people kind of gather together to, in their own way, in their own sector, address it, it definitely is achievable. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Gordon, what does it mean to you to decolonize?
I'll concur with that. Definitely the word inclusion comes to mind, and mutual respect, especially in terms of history. History that's usually taught as, again, quite Eurocentric. We don't sort of associate the first civilizations in this world with the African continent. They say it's Egypt, but Egypt, the first people in Egypt were African people. The first people along the Nile, between what is Egypt today and Sudan. That's there were civilizations there, and some of those civilizations fed other civilizations in Africa. So just to speak about Africa and speak about civilizations, that's decolonization in itself. We run a Saturday school. The main thing, we support the children with English and maths, right? But also we take them to the British Museum. We invite speakers. We have poets or whoever to come and raise the awareness of the children, because definitely it's not in the current curriculum. So therefore something has to be done in the curriculum, because it's only on Saturday when they come to the Saturday school that we have. And not just the African Caribbean community have Saturday schools. I think the Irish community, when they first came here, the Polish community, they have Saturday schools. So the tradition has been in England, because the curriculum itself does not address so-called minorities, right? It's more for European-centered history and culture.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Jason?
I'll be very brief. I think everyone's hit the nail on the head. But I think, sadly, the term decolonising or decolonised, unfranchised, some of the terms like diversification or inclusion. And I think maybe the question actually is, I think we've run before we can crawl. And it would be good to kind of understand, what does a colonised curriculum look like? And from that premise, then work to decolonising, because we've moved straight to decolonising. And even how that's situated is still against a backdrop of white supremacy. So actually there's a lot of unlearning that needs to happen in terms of colonised curriculum, why we have it, why it existed, why there was a careful erasure of black indigenous history. And then once we've done that, then we can move towards how we decolonise and have something that's more equitable and reflective of a multicultural, multi-ethnic society.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point. Again, it's like making sure that we're starting where we need to start, as opposed to kind of, again, running before we can walk, which is a really valid point. Brunel is actually going to be applying for the Race Equality Charter. Jason, you've just given me a bit... Did everyone see Jason smile when I said the Race Equality Charter? That was a very cheeky smile. Jason, why are you smiling at me like that when I just said that we're going to be applying for the Race Equality Charter? What's on your mind when I say that?
I just think that's... there's just so many casualties when that particular...
And that's my question. What advice can you give us about the Race Equality Charter?
Resource it. If I put it in one word, resource it and get the right fiscal and human resource to support those teams, because all too often it falls in the lap specifically of black and ethnic minority women. And I mentioned this the other day, but the kind of the collective success lays on the backs of those individuals and the labour of those individuals, and when it goes great, it's a collective success. When there's failure, it's individual. And I think it's really important that all members of the university community support those staff, and it's resourced by senior leaders, so it's done effectively. And I also think there's something to be said for men of colour, kind of taking the laurels at the finish line. And I think that's important, that if we're going to do this work, that actually men of colour, white men, white women need to contribute and be part of that, and ensure that the burden doesn't just fall on women of colour.
So it needs to be an equal process. Perfect. Thank you very much, Sophie.
Well, the Montfort University is currently reapplying for the Race Equality Charter.
So where are you at now with...
We submit by the end of this month.
Okay.
So literally in a week.
So are you reapplying for... Is that the bronze renewal?
Bronze renewal. No one's done silver or gold before.
Just to give everyone some context, Race Equality Charter is an award that universities can have, and it ultimately means that you have tackled racial harassment within your university. So if you get this award, I think there are only, out of the 140 universities, I think there are about 13 or 14 that have achieved an award. as Sophie said, no one has achieved silver, but many people are still currently trying to achieve bronze and bronze renewal. So tell us about your process.
I think we're going to university to actually get our bronze renewed.
Excellent.
But I think just mirroring what Jason says, people have to understand at senior levels how important this is. If they don't, it's going to be very difficult to get buy-in, because as someone who's come into the higher education sector as of 18 months ago, everybody is extremely busy. Everybody seems to be extremely overworked. Everyone has a bunch of things to do, and when you're asking them to now get involved with the Race Equality Charter, you're asking them to think about where the gaps are, where people of different racial backgrounds are not getting the support that they need, the encouragement, where the gaps are, how we can better help. A lot of people see that as an additional thing that they need to do that they're not actually getting paid for.
Yes.
And I think there is a difficulty, because I don't think we can wait for everybody to buy into solving the racial inequalities, because the work will never start. But there needs to be, people need to be incentivized and understand why this is important. Otherwise, you spend a lot of time chasing people to get them on board, to understand why there needs to get this action plan across the deadline. And it really has to be about long-term change. And I think some universities can go into it thinking, one, it looks really good on our resume. And number two, well, why don't we say that we're going to do activities that we can actually achieve by the next time we have to apply? Which defeats the purpose, because it's going to to tackle these issues for real, it's going to take a long time, and you're going to have to put things on there that you might not necessarily solve in 5 years, but you're saying we're going to work towards this. It might take us 10 years, we might not get the award, but the point is we have the commitment to do it. And I think that's where the difference is.
See, that's a really valid point. So with that said, I'm going to ask you all your final question, which is, what is your number one piece of advice for Brunel University in relation to tackling institutionalised racism and racial harassment? So if you could pick one piece of advice for all of us here want to learn, we want to grow, we want to be better versions of ourselves, we want to connect with our students, we want to connect with other staff. What can we do better at Brunel in terms of tackling these racial disparities? I know it's a very loaded question for you all, so think long and hard. What can we do better in terms of trying to tackle racial harassment? If there was one piece of advice, what would it be? I'll start with you, Jason.
I would say bold leadership.
Okay.
I think senior leaders need to be accountable, and I think all too often they can abdicate that responsibility. And I think the biggest thing that a senior leader can do is really to think in terms of feet first, head second.
Yeah.
So feet first is culture, head second is strategy, and really think about, because all too often when we engage in anti-racist endeavour, we strategize.
Yes, it becomes almost like tick box, because everything is so much admin and so much paperwork, and obviously everyone has a militant approach, but it can easily become a tick box exercise.
I think it's an incredibly difficult thing to do when you're absent, when you're minus a culture. You don't have a culture that facilitates and sustains and mobilises black and ethnic minority endeavour. So without that, to strategise around that, it's a little bit arse about face.
Yeah.
It doesn't really actually
make sense
to do that. So I think that's the biggest thing in world leadership, because I do think there are senior leaders, sadly, in the sector, let's use that word instead, that go hiding a bit, and I think that's not really conducive to penetrative anti-racist endeavour.
Okay, so bold leadership, number one. Thank you very much, Jason. Gordon?
Well, I must say I was impressed to see that your position, mine is race...
Anti-racism officer.
Right. Just actually, right, which is, a departure from a diversity officer. So I think the university must be commended in having that position.
Do we get around to it? Yes! Thank you.
I hope they listen to you.
So do I. You've all heard me say it, right?
And the thing is that we usually have people of colour, I would say, in these positions, but they're not usually conscious. The new word is woke. But it's good to have a woke person in that position.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Appreciate it.
Okay, advice.
Yes. Or something that works well for you, that you're currently doing, that you think other people should know about? Because obviously you spoke so eloquently about decolonising the curriculum. You went into quite a lot of detail in terms of pedagogies and the way in which you do decolonise when you're working. So even if it's a piece of advice that you know you do well, that you could pass on to others.
Yeah, I think just like nurturing an environment where everybody has a voice and feels seen, and they feel like they can thrive and flourish where they are. I think that's really important for this university, and I've seen that actually. So just to continue to create spaces for people to progress and to reach promotions and not feel like because of their gender or their race it's a barrier. So yeah, creating a nurturing environment for growth.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Benjamin?
I came to academia very late in life, and almost accidentally and one of the first things that happened was a lot of students would book meetings with me just to see me. Just to see me.
That makes a lot of sense, Benjamin. Let's be honest. It makes a lot of sense.
But one of the things that, and I don't know if this is answering your question directly, but this is the only thing I can think of. One of the things that gets me sometimes, and it happens to me a lot, it's happened to me just recently, where people, students and staff, have come to me, but mainly with the staff, and they tell me about some racism they've experienced, but they're so scared of speaking up. And a lot of the time it's because of promotion. And I don't know if everybody can do this, I really don't know, but we had two situations not so long ago. One of them was directly a racist situation, and one of them was to do with Palestine, Israel. And I must say, I wrote straight to the Vice Chancellor, and he was great. We had a meeting almost immediately. He was on the case. Yeah. And he dealt with it to the best of his ability at the time. So what am I saying? There's two things there. Go to the top if you can, but also don't be afraid to speak. And what we've got to do, when we were coming in here this evening, you said, Benjamin, be my backup. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And we've got to look after, we've got to take care of each other's backs, you know? And not be afraid if it's a matter of promotion or whatever. I mean, I've never really been in that situation. I've been in a situation where I've spoken up and not got a television show or something like that, and well, F to you, I'm going to go and do something else. But if we all sit together, then members of staff that see something wrong, and even if they have to administer it sometimes, they can speak up and say, well, I'm not teaching this, or I'm not doing this, or I'm not going to tolerate it. That's what I can say.
I think that's an excellent point. It's the sticking together part, because again, if you're by yourself and you have to, you're contending with racism and there aren't any actual systems in place to support you, and then there's no one else that's got your back, as Benjamin says, then it's a scary place, especially if you potentially are not going to get promoted. You may end up feeling alienated, and your staff or your colleagues or other students may end up kind of making you feel quite isolated because you've made a decision to stand up and speak out. So again, it's that sticking together, I think, is a really important point. The more the merrier, and hopefully that can help with that courage and confidence. So thank you. Sophie?
Well, first I wanted to say I hope it's every letter that VC takes seriously and not just the ones from the Benjamin Zephaniah.
Right? Isn't that the truth? Isn't that the truth? She had to say it, Benjamin. She had to say it. We're not all called Benjamin. They take your work very seriously in my office as well. Right.
They would book that meeting and speak to you.
Exactly.
Sure. I think apart what everyone has said, and I really resonated with what Jason said in terms of senior leadership, I would also say, I don't know if this is controversial, so
no, you've got to say it now.
I'll take the 2 minutes to say it, but find some white people that are down for the cause.
Yeah, the allies. We all know this word, allies.
Just because I work in EDI, the people in my EDI team that I work with, 2 Asian people, I'm black, 2 white people, and there are conversations that white men want to have with the other white guy in our team that he doesn't want to have with us. And it's really frustrating, as Jason was saying, the work being on black women, women of colour to do the work, sometimes what happens is that it's not taken seriously because the only person ever talking about EDI are people of colour. So it seems like, well, of course, because it benefits you. That's why. And you need other people who see the purpose of the work, who are willing to be associated with perhaps losing some privilege or understanding for people to listen, because they're like, well, that person's not necessarily, I can't see them really gaining anything from it, then maybe this is something that I should be thinking about and doing, and not just because it benefits one group of people. And the point is, it doesn't benefit one group of people, but that is the way that it's now being positioned in society, that we're trying to take something away. So we're trying to get children from poorer backgrounds into universities, and we're taking spots from white privileged children, and we're just framing it in a way to make it sound like it's a loss or a gain.
Yes.
And we need to have the people who are willing to say, no, it's not, and we should all be on the side of this, because it's not only the right thing to do, but everyone eventually benefits from it.
Can I just answer one quick question, just to add on to that? Do you have any advice as to how you get that buy-in, how you make people care, even though they may believe it has nothing to do with them? Do you have any kind of tactics? Is there anything that you could advise in terms of that buy-in and trying to get people to care, even if they think it's not?
I don't think you can start with the people who don't care.
Yeah.
You have to start with the people who do care. And there are people who are not black, Asian, who care about the work and want to do it because they see that it is the right thing to do, and they see that this isn't fair. You start with those people, because people need to have a passion for the work, and then hopefully you can build on that. Not everybody is going to get involved with the work because they think it's the right thing to do, and I wish that was the case. I know Nicola Roll, she was talking about the fact that there's such a low percentage of black women professors in higher education, and a paper that I saw her write on it. She said, I'm just laughing because my husband always says I use bad English and say she wrote on it.
That's right. South East London,
The paper that she wrote on the situation, she was saying, we can't just wait for everybody to buy in. We need to incentivize and say this is going to benefit everyone, this is how it's going to benefit you, this is how it's going to benefit you. Because we want to be like, no, people need to see it's the right thing to do. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, but you definitely have to start with the people who have a heart for the work.
Oh, I love that. Thank you very much. And I think that obviously moves swiftly to, firstly, I want to give a round of applause to you, because she's clearly talking about all of us here in the room. So a round of applause to everyone that showed up today. I just want to open up the floor for just a couple of questions. I know we've run out of time, but I do want to, if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to take questions. If not, would anyone like to pose a question? Amazing, thank you very much. Okay. She's got the box for you, it's coming. Excellent.
First of all, thank you very much for a really thrilling and exciting talk. I really enjoyed listening to your conversation, and my friend and I have been just chatting away and discussing some of the conversation as well. My question is really about the Race Equality Charter, and I'm writing about some of this work, and I've been drawing on Jason Arday's work, as well as Sarah Ahmed's work, and going back to when the Race Relations Amendment Act came, and there was a huge duty for higher education to change and create these action plans and policies. And we pretty much know what happened, because those were created and there was a huge amount of paperwork. And I think Sarah Ahmed talks about, well, if you've written a policy and an action plan, then you've done it. How is the race equality charter any different? And particularly for those institutions who have got it, but also for Brunel who are looking to get it. I don't know whether anyone can respond to that.
So what I will say is that what I'm hoping, obviously I can't talk on behalf of what happened before me, but I know that obviously with my being here, I have every intention of making sure that this doesn't turn into a tick box exercise. This is something that's really important for me, and I want to hold on to what Jason spoke about, which is starting with culture. And I think, again, typically the way that things are usually done is it's strategy, and then that becomes tick box, and then it just turns into just another thing that you have that no one actually really cares about or is really connected to. So for me, it is about galvanizing the community, trying to integrate everyone, because ultimately we have a very diverse university, but if you notice, a lot of us are in silos, whether it's staff, whether it's communities, everyone kind of sticks to their own. So for me personally, I'd like to start with culture, then move on to the strategizing part, and at that part, I'm hoping that that process us will avoid the tick boxing and then lead on to actually progressing and actually having that tangible change. So that's my plan, and hopefully if everyone listens, we'll get it done.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'd probably just add on to that. I think that the Race Equality Charter, they've done a really good job in terms, is it Advanced HE you've done?
Yes.
Yes. Advanced HE, they've actually done a good job, I would say, in making sure that the application itself and the work that you have to do to get the award isn't a tick box, just because of how intense the process is and how much you have to really reflect on what your university is doing, and they're not really going to take any half-assed action that you're going to try and put together. You have to really show and reflect on the data that what it is that you're doing, what it is that you're putting down, is that something that is actually going to address a gap that you have. That's on their side. As for the institution, there really needs to be mechanisms in place to make sure that it's not just about the application, that you actually want to commit to doing this, because a lot of work goes into the back end of putting this together. We spend months trawling through data, but now we've had to put systems in place, like the groups or the assessment teams that we've put in place to look at the gaps have to stay in place for the duration of until the duration of our next application, because we need to check in, we need to make sure things are getting followed up on. And I think that's where the gap is, because we can write a great plan, but who's seeing it through, and you have to make sure that those teams are in place. And hopefully if those two are working together, there will be change, hopefully.
So it's that longevity that needs to be taken into consideration.
It
can't just be a little project.
It has to be sustainable. If you're not building it to be sustainable, then it's not going to be sustainable.
Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Thank you very much.
Thank you. The responses were really reflective and valuable, as for me as an academic, female, British-born South Asian woman. A couple of reflections. One of them, drawing on Jason Arday's term of the franchising of decolonising. I think we have to be very mindful in academia about how the language is being franchised to suit institutional agendas. So that's one of them. So just pulling on what Jason said there. Another point from yourself, when you said, I applaud everybody who's turned up. So that, for me, signals, why haven't certain leaders turned up today?
I agree.
Okay, so thank you for saying
that. Agree.
And the term, I think it was Sophie, is it Sophie who said, was it just your letter, Benjamin, that got noticed? Now, Benjamin, I love you to bits, as you know. You still hold, as a black man, certain privilege in this institution. But what about those women of colour who have been racialised but are afraid to speak up for fear of possibly losing jobs, for not getting promoted, for being seen as those thorns in the side? And I draw on Sarah Ahmed's work here on complaint and those hidden complaints. So I applaud Jason for actually raising the profile of women in this, who are often the ones suffering from the trauma. It is complex racism. It's, for some people, the word racism makes them tremble, because we think it's almost like this post-feminist era, that we're in this post-race era. Well, we're not. It's rife more than ever, I feel, but in different ways. But thank you for putting this on. It means a lot. I've been here 18 years, and it means a lot to see the people who are on the panel. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I think that deserves a round of applause. That was excellent. Thank you. Oh, you've got two behind you. You've got yes. Thank you. Thanks,
Can I
Sam.
just say very quickly that of the two letters I wrote, one of them was joined, and it was 3 women of salvation. And the other one, was also the one that I mentioned, Palestine, Israel, was also a woman, actually, and she wrote separately and got a similar response. So it can be done. You've just got to do it, and even if you don't get listened to, you've got to do it again and do it again.
It's what we do even when we're tired. We keep doing it.
Yeah, I want to add to that, just in terms of that, it's the 2 points. It's the again, making sure that people have your back. It's that allyship. I feel like, again, it's one thing, I think, again, it's theory to practice, right? It's one thing saying stand up, but if you have a mortgage and your boss doesn't particularly like you and you're now going to say that this person was racist, how do you do that? You could potentially lose your job, you could potentially lose the promotion that you've been genuinely dying for and you deserve. So I think it's really hard. And I think the only thing that I can possibly think of in that particular situation is the only time I feel comfortable is when I have people that have my back. If I know that I have a group, a team that I can speak to, whether they are, they work with me or close to me or near me, whatever it is, if I have a team that I know supports me, understands and believes in my work ethic, encourages me to grow, I think those are the things that will help. So when it does come down to actually asking for help or making a complaint, you know that you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other people that's got your back, and so you might have that second opinion when needed.
I was going to say, I totally agree with everything that's been said, but I do think white allies could do more.
Yeah.
There's just too many examples of just not. Like, my mum always used to say, "Jason, here is Nelson Mandela. What do you do with hard work?"
Yeah.
And that's always the story. Like, you have these amazing women of colour that do this work, and in the end, the recognition is never theirs to own.
Yeah.
The role is taken from them, and I do think you could do a lot more. Right? And I was speaking myself. I won't speak for anyone else. I'll point the finger at myself, but you can do a lot more.
Yeah.
Winnie Mandela did so much for the struggle in South Africa. She made 1 or 2 mistakes, and that was it. She was the worst woman in the world.
Yeah.
And everybody forgot all the work she did whilst Madiba was in prison.
No, really important point. Thank you. Thank you both. Amazing. Sorry, sir, to keep you waiting.
I want to say thank you, first of all, for the rich and mind-sharpening conversation. What I'd like to ask is whether any of you feel that there is space or value in the anti-racism work that is happening and needs to be done to bring in the conversation around classism, socio-economic and cultural classism. Because for me, we talk a lot about racism in institutions. Institutions are predominantly middle-class, bureaucratic organizations. When the conversation on anti-racism becomes, oh, we're not racist as a country, it's because, oh, look at the last 4 chancellors, look at the last 2 home secretaries. And for me, look at Rupert Huck said something very racist. I want to be absolutely clear, racist and stupid. And I tried to understand where was she coming from, what was she talking about. And for me, this is where nuance of language is super important. But I can't help but feel that racism for me, it's the othering. It's the unnecessary bias and othering when there's no real reason for it. And I see that happening from a class perspective as well. And I can't help but feel that there's a real conflation between socio-economic and cultural things and issues, and racism, and people like Akala talk about this a lot. I can't help but feel that there's a lot more room and space for that conversation to be factored into the anti-racism work, but I feel like I don't see it or hear it enough, and I'm just interested in getting your viewpoints on that.
I think that's a really important point. It's something that we do speak about a lot. So we always mention intersectionality, so really taking into consideration what it's like to potentially be black, Muslim and disabled, right? That's a really good example of having to contend with all these different types of discriminatory behaviours. And I think that exactly what you spoke about in terms of class, I think that there is a clear intersect. I think someone gave the example, I had a friend the other day actually, he was talking about he got stopped. And he's extremely well spoken. He went to Oxford, and he got stopped in the car by the police. He opens his mouth. He sounds really articulate. They let him go. I have another friend, not so articulate, probably sitting in the cell right now as we speak. So there is a difference in terms of when it comes to class, you have to take that into consideration with race. So I think, again, it's just about having those conversations about intersectionality, religion, gender, disability, all of those things can be weaved in. It's very much part of the EDI agenda at Brunel, and it's something that we will continue to make sure it's covered within the anti-racism initiatives. So that's my personal point. Anyone can add to that, by the way. I hope that answers your question.
Yes.
Good. Perfect.
I'll just say very quickly, I think class is very, very important. It's the conversation that within the black community you kind of have very quietly in certain quarters about black middle class, and are they representative of us, and can they speak for us, etc., etc. I don't want to get too political, I'm not into politics. But if you look at Liz Truss and her first cabinet, I listened to a radio programme. They were all school friends. Yeah. They literally plotted it in school.
Yeah. It's just
it's like when we get out of school, right, we're going to start again, right? We're going to do this. They literally did it in school. And I think, again, I'm going to be political.
Yeah, just do it.
I think that one of the greatest achievements that the Tory party of Great Britain has done is that they've created a multicultural, diverse party, and they've been able to do that by finding black people who don't like black people. And that's really good. That's really, that's an amazing thing to do.
This was the assimilation thing that we was talking about, that conversation about assimilating. So it's like, I'll just pose a question, food for thought, and just to add on to your point, right? So there is this conversation, again, I mentioned it earlier, some black and brown people say that they haven't experienced racism, they've never seen it, they don't know anything about it. We heard that your mum was someone who used to kind of almost refuse to ever admit it. So you have some cohorts, or a camp rather, that hasn't actually experienced racism. And like Jason said, it's unfair and it's actually quite rude to imply that they have if they're telling you categorically that they haven't. There is also another camp that are completely and utterly in denial. Now, this camp, in my personal opinion, the reason why that they are in denial is because of a certain level of assimilation. Now, as every human being lives on this planet, we all need to, or we all inherently have the need to fit in. We all want to be a part of a community. We all want to be liked. We all want to fit in. And so for black people now living in the West, assimilation is just a natural part of being a human being. You have to assimilate, right? And I've always had these conversations, and I found that those that are deemed as not black, not liking other black people, or Asian, not liking other Asian people, those people, I find, tend to have assimilated so much so that they have now started to reject their culture. And this could actually be for a number of reasons. It could be because of cultural appreciation, so they actually appreciate Eurocentrism, and it's something that they aspire towards. And so therefore we can now negate where they come from. It could be because of a bad experience of racism, right? So imagine having to contend with racism all the time, and it's something that you cannot deal with anymore, so you just shy it off, and you just literally, you're in denial, you don't see it anymore, and you're now going to kind of try to get through life as if it doesn't exist, because that's the easiest way for your brain to hack it, basically. So these are the conversations that I find quite interesting, and just to add to your point, I think it is that assimilation, right? And then it also touches on this gentleman's point about class, right? And so it's that when you have, maybe in my opinion, I think when you assimilate too much, you can come across as if you have, neglected your culture and dismissed your fellow black people. What do you think about that? Do you think, am I wrong in saying that? Do you agree? Do you see any...
I think that might be the case for some people, maybe. But I also think, as I get older, I have to realise that not everyone blacks the way that I black. You know, some people... people are black, and they might be like, that experience, that way that you define your blackness is not the way that I define. Some people don't see their race as a defining quality of who they are. I do. Yeah. I do see it as a defining quality of who I am. I do see it as affecting my life more in positive. I'm very proud to be black. I'm very, I am. But some people don't see it as a defining quality, and I think also the class question was so important because I think there are certain insulations that money and class have that can make people feel like maybe they don't experience racism. So they can say, I don't experience racism, because if you are extremely wealthy and you go to certain universities and certain private schools, and that you can go through life having, because there is a certain level of prestige and privilege that money will give you, even if you might be not of a white Eurocentric background. So I think that can be true, and I think that they can people can then feel like, I'm just a person and that my race doesn't define me. And I think that is not my experience, but they are entitled to their experience, and they are still allowed to call themselves black and not have to be representative of the race and not have to feel that they need to care about every black issue. I do care about those things, but I feel like there has to be freedom enough for people to be able to associate like that as well, and not to see it as them giving up their black card.
And that is a conversation within the community. That's the point, that there are some people that believe that, you know, the many people that have been referred to in the most recent government have potentially not been.
That's the thing, you see. You know, people can be black in different ways.
Yeah.
But when you have to administer racism
in order to do it, that's the
But when you join government and you're kind of backing racist policies, that's different. I just want to say something. I'm half smiling when I say this because it's serious. I have a friend who really shouldn't be my friend, right? But he's my friend because I find him such a caricature.
Yeah.
He's a black guy, and he hates Black Lives Matter, right? He hates trans. And at the moment, I spoke to him the other day, and he hates people going green. And he's a black man, and he thinks, well, if a man can identify as a woman, blah, 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 he has the right to, and he's doing it. He identifies as white. and that is real denial. Yeah. That is real denial. He really has a problem. It's an extreme version. Yeah. But he absolutely denies black culture. And, like I said, hates Black Lives Matter, and he's a Trump supporter. But I find it very odd. But I like him as a friend. Well, I don't like him as a friend. I like to have him there, just to have a laugh every now and again, because he's just so weird. Yeah. You know? But it doesn't fit. And just to touch on Sophie's point, what he was ultimately saying is that, again, we don't fit into a box, right? And so it's like those people, that person doesn't necessarily fit into a box. So is that person less black because they don't fit into a box, right? So I think that was ultimately what you was touching on, Sophie, in terms of people not being put into a box. And there is no actual kind of set way to be a black person. Oh yeah, I remember making a film once, and we had to go into a room. And you know, it's like when you're making a film, you meet somebody, and they say, well, can you meet again? Yes. And then I went and met the person, and then the director said, can you be more black?
That's the point. You know, that's the point.
How do we greet each other being more black? You know, hey man, how you going, bro? High five. Yeah. Something like that. But yeah, that's their perception of black culture.
Yes, Gordon. Sorry.
We got all the money.
Yeah, again, the historical part of it. The race and class is always intertwined because, as we know, like in the Caribbean, it was white planters, and then you had like working class whites as the overseers, and then you had the black enslaved at the bottom. So a whole society was based on color and class. And this is something that, whether, especially from the African perspective, African-Caribbean perspective, whether you're from Africa under colonization, in the Caribbean, if you were under enslavement, the closer you were to the master, who happened to be white. Now, there was a pecking order because there's a saying, if you're white, it's all right, brown stick around, black stay in the back, right? And so, like, across the town, there's people at that extreme that will assimilate, to me, to like it's a survival mechanism, right? Because we talk in the Caribbean, when you speak well, you speak the Queen's English. If you speak Creole, that's looked down on. So there's so many aspects there. There's color, the way you speak, where you live. So class and race are always intertwined.
Totally agree. Thank you. Yes, Royana. Oh, sorry, did you have questions
We have
from
some
online?
questions from the live stream.
Oh, amazing. Thank you.
So, there's two for the panel. The first question is from Derek, who said, should we still try and enter spaces where there isn't representation of us or diversity, or create our own spaces of diversity with our own values and beliefs?
So I'll start, and I'll say I think both. I've always said both. I think you need both. I think you do need representation, and you need to enter as many different spaces as possible, because ultimately when spaces are diverse, you learn more, you pick up more, and I think that in itself is a really good process. So definitely try to get into spaces where you are potentially the only black or brown person, and then I think also having a safe space for yourself is really important as well. So I would always say both, but I'm curious to hear what the panel thinks.
If we are fighting to be British, we can be British not just in Tottenham or Handsworth, or, we can be British in Devon or whatever. I think it's we can be whatever we want to be in Britain. We don't have to have this strict definition of the spaces that we fill. It's really nice now seeing, black people on television doing nature programs, for example, which always used to be the domain of the white man. When I was going to live in the countryside, I had black people and kind of white liberals saying, "But that's not your place, is it?" I said, "Well, if I'm going to talk about being British and want to be British, then I can live anywhere. You can't just restrict me to the village." And ironically, if you look at a lot of our foreparents, they come from Punjab, farming area. My family come from St. Elizabeth in Jamaica, farming area. They weren't inner city people in Jamaica. It was only dubbed inner city people when they came to England. So we have the right to live everywhere and go in any space we want to.
That reminds me of something you said to me about, I can't remember what it was. You wrote something and they called it urban. You said you wrote in the countryside and you couldn't quite understand why they refer to it as urban.
I made some music and they kept labelling it urban, and I said, no, it's rural. It's rural hip-hop reggae.
Yeah, right, in the countryside. I remember you said that. Thank you. Did anyone else want to answer Derek's point about safe spaces? Should we, Jason? Do you want to add?
Just a small point. I guess similar to what you said about having both. I think it's important to integrate in places that you're not the majority and to be bold, because your passions and interests could take you into spaces where you're not the majority. There are some people who are into science or coding. They could be the only black person there, but that's what they love, that's what they want to do. I think having a safe space where you can be around people, shared experiences and shared values is important, so just striking that balance.
Perfect. Thank you.
As I said before, it's a multi-front struggle.
Get some more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, second question was from Tree2 Stumps, who said, do you think, considering the subject of subtle racism, that restrictions on natural is in fact racist?
Say that again.
I'm not too sure if I understand the question. So it says, do you think, considering the subject of subtle racism, that restrictions on natural is in fact racist?
Natural hair?
Natural restrictions on natural. Ask the person.
If you're still on the stream, could you just potentially rephrase the question and then we'll answer it?
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Oh, sorry. Were you in?
Perfect.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, it's the mic. Catch box. Yes, it's a mic.
It's just a cuddly box, that's all. I just want to start by saying thank you for your generosity and your very loving contributions this evening. It feels like a real gift. I want to go back to the point that a lot of comments and Jason, your point about seeking out allyship and what that means in terms of actions. And I know you were talking about it in terms of the Race Equality Charter, but wider point as well. And really just to say that what that might mean, my heart is beating really fast as I'm saying this, because I just want to say what allyship means in practice is sometimes very different to what people who claim that they're allies are able to give to us. And I guess this is a plea to say enough of the personal text messages and the emails that you write to say, I saw that, it happened to you, I'm so sorry, it was terrible. When it happens, speak up in person. Stand up for, use your relative position of privilege to speak up in the moment, and actually make an intervention that is public, that actually makes you take a risk in that moment in time, because the text messages and the emails really don't matter if you're not putting yourself on the line alongside ourselves. So I just wanted to say that, and
I totally agree
to
with
thank you for getting me to the point to articulate that.
Thank you, Rona. Really, really important point. Thank you very much. Oh, Grant. Oh, yes. Yeah, Sophie's going to...
Just to say to that, I was reading an article recently that was saying, allyship isn't a self-defined title, it's defined by the people who you're allies to. If they say that you're an ally to them, then you're an ally. And it's not enough to just say I'm an ally because I send a text message in this. It has to be defined by I see the allyship and I understand and we're standing together in this. So I think that's so important what you said.
Excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Grant.
Grant Peterson, thank you so much to the entire panel. It's been a very informative and inspiring discussion. Just two comments, kind of follow-ups, and if it spurs responses, great. One, on Royana's point and the previous discussion about women of color feeling the agency and ability to speak up, to send an email. And you cited the importance to have allies, to have people have your back, absolutely part of it. But I think a lot of it's the culture change. So if someone doesn't have the allies, that they know that the institution is open to that, that have clear channels of policies and procedures and a track record of doing so. So thank you for being a key part of that. And thank you for the people here who have been listening and hopefully can spread and cascade that culture, because it's cultural as much as it is structural, and they're integrated. So thank you for being part of that. My second comment, as you might have told, deemed from my accent, I come from the States, and from the panel examples that have been talked about, it really highlighted the extra amount of venom in British racism that is intersecting with anti-migration. And anti-globalization, and go back home, even though that has nothing to do with where you actually come from. It's part of the white racism that is here. And because we are such an international university, I'm just very conscious of one that, just to backtrack, that's another sign of this sophistication of particularly black British existence and the racist systems that are navigated. But at a university with so many international students from different backgrounds, from different homes and stuff like that, I wonder if there's something particular that we can do or be aware of as far as building coalitions that are not so decentered and dividable on the international element, if that makes any sense. But because it's not so much an issue in the States as far as the type of racism is not connected necessarily to a migration as much as it seems to be here. And I was wondering about the panel's response to that. Oh. Can I throw it back to you?
Anyone want to answer? I feel bad answering because I'm just going to hog it all, so I'll give you the opportunity.
I'll just say, and then I'll pass on. And I think it's so interesting what you were saying, because I think it's so important to understand about the dynamics of racism just differ in every country. And it's so true. Like when I studied Black British history, that's what I'm studying my master's in, and we've had people on our cohort who are from America who didn't even understand about racism in the United Kingdom, and just thought that they had the only black experience until they came here. So I think that's so important to understand. In terms of international students, some of the work that I've done at university, working alongside other people, this was their work, and I've assisted, was about one thing. Sometimes we can focus on racial dynamics, but one of the big things with international students and students is belonging. That so many people just don't have any community, anyone that's looking out for them, and they don't feel like they belong. And I think one of the things to really focus on is that sense of belonging, that they're welcomed into this community because they're from a different country, they're from a different place where the the culture is different, phrases are different, all these various things that they're having to navigate, and sometimes they can feel an outsider, so being aware of those cultural differences which might not even necessarily be racial.
Thank you, really important point.
To add to what Sophie said, I completely agree. That sense of belonging is so important, and just, I think as you would for anyone, just showing kindness, smiling, just making them feel integrated in the new environment, learning their names. I think that's a big one. Like just asking them what name do you want me? Because not every, we have an international cohort at the medical school as well, and not every name they've given you is the name they actually want to be called. Because we had one girl who has like her traditional name, but she asks to be called Charlie. It's like, okay, if that's what you want. But yeah, I think that is, in terms of making them feel at home, is what I'm saying.
I just want to say that in my experience, with the black British community on campus, it's much more easier for us to communicate with them. We can almost tell who we are by the way we dress, or the dreadlocks, or whatever it is. With the international community, it's a bit more difficult. And sometimes I do wish, I've been to one or two of them, but not that many of them, where they have kind of cultural days where we actually do intermix. I haven't seen many of them lately, but then again, we're only really just creeping back onto campus. But I remember when I first came, I went to a few of them, and they were really good with the Chinese community, you know, the Indian and Pakistani community. I did have an experience just a couple of days ago, not at this university, at the British Academy, and there was a person there who I met actually in Europe when I was making a program, and it was really interesting because he was Nigerian, but he was Biafran. I don't know if you know what that means. Biafra is a kind of particular tribe when I was a kid, the big war where there was children starving was Biafra. Yeah. I remember after that experience with the racists, seeing some starving child on television and saying to my mother, "Mother, look what those white people are doing to us." And she said, "No, son, that's black people doing it to black people." Oh my gosh. But so Biafrans are a tribe within Nigeria, and he felt that he couldn't go to events that were dominated by Nigerians. And I've seen in this university Taiwanese students and Hong Kong students who don't want to go to events that are Chinese. And there's some other examples of that with Turkish students, for example, and Armenians. So it's a shame really, because this is a place where we should mix and we should dance together, we should eat together and all that kind of stuff. Fortunately, I mean, the West Indies, and if I can include Guyana in the West Indies, when it comes to the university and cricket, Guyana is classed as West Indies. You know, as much as the different islands are quite diverse and quite different, you know, we've never really gone to war. We've never gone to war. No West Indian country has ever gone to war with another Caribbean country, which is a great thing. But it's a shame we just don't have more of those events, and people will just drop the stuff, the baggage, the political, tribal baggage that they have back home.
I think just to add to that point, Grant, I think, again, it stems on the point that I was trying to make earlier about the fact that we are very much a siloed culture here at Brunel, whether people realise it or not. Staff work in silos, students interact in silos, right? So the Bangladeshi stay with the Bangladeshi. The Jamaicans and the Africans, they stay with the Jamaicans and Africans. The East Asian will stay, right? I've noticed that, and I've only been here for 3 months. We have a lack of integration. So I think, again, to touch on what Jason says about starting with culture, I think it is, and then to add to Benjamin's point, it's about that integration for me personally. It's definitely one of the things that we pride ourselves on at Brunel, is trying to lead with integration. So I think that would be my personal first port of call, is to have these events where it is multicultural. So obviously with this, as we know, Black History Month is very much a niche topic. It's very much suited for the Black community and what there needs to be moving forward, and more events where it's not synonymous with just one community, and therefore everyone feels welcome, everyone feels comfortable. So it's not being led by Black people, so therefore I shouldn't go. It's not being led by just white people, so I shouldn't go. It's not just led by Chinese people, so I shouldn't go. It's a multicultural, multi-diverse event where we have everyone kind of representing. So I think integration is a really, really key part of the process.
We have questions again from the live stream.
Okay, sorry, I'm very much aware that we have gone over time, so apologies if there is anyone that does need to go, because I'm sure people are sitting politely. If you do need to go, you're more than welcome to. Hopefully we can get these questions in quickly before we head
thank you to everyone who's been patient with the questions coming through as well. So there's two questions, but firstly I just quickly have to say this conversation that we just had about the migration issues and the fact that, say, Black Americans might be shocked that there are our own set of issues in the UK, but it reminds me of a TikTok I saw this week where someone went up to young Black students from finishing school or after school and asked them to name something that they know about UK Black history, and not a single person could name anything. I think one student mentioned the Windrush, but other than that, everything that we've been taught about Black history has been from America, and we don't know a whole lot about the UK and our own set of unique issues that we have here.
And just to add to that, and it actually touches on what you was talking about, Grant. I watched something after you said TikTok. I was like, oh, I remember a video. Someone, like a YouTuber, went up to some like young Black boys and was basically just saying that, said, where are you from? And then they all said, Jamaica, Nigeria, this, that, and the other. And then he started laughing. He was American. He started laughing. He said, English people can't claim British. If you're Black, you can't really claim British. 9 times out of 10, even though we now have started to make sure that that's incorporated in our kind of surveys and application forms, British Black. But in terms of most Black people, a lot of Black people I found growing up will typically say they are Nigerian or Jamaican. They'll revert back to heritage. Whereas in America, it's your, what is the term? In America, African American, right? It's like basically there's less of an issue in terms of that migration. So there's something very specific about England, and I think that touches on that point that you just made.
Anyway, back to the live stream.
Yes,
the questions.
Yes.
Sorry guys for everyone that's waiting. So the question that was rephrased was: do you think, considering the subject of subtle racism, that restrictions on natural hair is in fact racist?
Dreads, afro, locks.
So potentially people being sent home from school because they've got their afros out or something.
Seen as unprofessional in the workplace if you come in with an afro. Gordon?
I think it comes back again to the historical thing that there's a Euro conformity. So a certain standard is set with straight hair down to very tightly coiled hair. That's how I see it. With skin color, hair, you can just go on speech. It's all there in society. So it comes back to one of the earlier questions: is Britain racist? Well, yes, because it's come through a process of being developed with most of the institutions being affected by racism.
I was going to say, in a previous life, I was a PE teacher, and which seems like such a long time ago, but literally 7-10 years ago. And the school that I taught in had a policy which was specifically for Black boys and Black girls around hair, and basically it was that they had to, as they deemed it, have tame hair. And parents would ask, well, how do you define tame hair? Because there are white students who have long, medium length hair. What exactly is tame? And like, Black girls should have hair that is no more than 2 inches, and Black boys should have hair that's less than 1 inch. And that was 2011.
Wow.
So it's kind of quite remarkable that is in the conversation. But then I guess culturally there's kind of inference around natural hair where, how do people have to think about that as a concept going into work? My mum begged me not to have locks. And she said, and her rationale was that people won't take you seriously. That's what she'd say, and that's quite incredible for like a kind of. Well, my mum's the most radical person I know, but the irony is she kind of said, "No, Jason, I've seen it. I've seen it. I've seen how it." And I said, "Oh, Lenny Kravitz, I wonder about that." So that's kind of how it went. But it's just really interesting. Like I said, that was 2011. And that's a conversation we're still having, and then the fetishization that comes with that, in of itself, is quite a remarkable thing. The idea that you can go up to someone and touch their hair, touch their person without asking, and this is across any kind of racial intersect. Whether it be black culture, South Asian culture, Romani, traveller culture. It's just interesting kind of how these things are also fetishized as well.
Just quickly add that even in the Caribbean, a lot of the Rastafarian community in the early days were persecuted by the police, actually. Shaving their heads and...
You have to understand, they were arresting us and chopping our hair off. In Barbados and in Jamaica and other places. It was, even within the black community, dreadlocks at one point were seen as threatening.
I was going to say, I was just going to exactly say what Gordon and Benjamin said, in that we have, as black people, have internalised some of these dialogues as well. Because my nieces now have like their afro plus that, I'm so happy that they rock their natural hair, because I tell them, I was like, when I was younger, when you got to secondary school, it was a rite of passage to relax your hair.
Yeah, assimilation. And you didn't realise it was.
Secondary school, you relaxed your hair because you were grown now. And you relaxed your hair, that was it. But now there's this current wave. But my mum, their grandmother will say, it's just looking a bit wild. You can't get a comb through it. And as black people, as if you have natural hair, how dangerous combs are.
Yes.
Because it's really outrageous. She was like, you can't get a comb through it easy. It's not combed. This wild look. And my husband, he's a minister of religion in black-led churches, black dominant community churches, and there is this thing about him not being professional now because he's growing dreadlocks, and are people going to take him seriously? And and so we have to also be aware of it. It's not just white communities that are perpetuating these ideas of what respectability looks like. We do it to ourselves, and we need to be mindful of breaking down those barriers as well.
Spot on.
So final question from the live stream. So it's in a couple parts. So it says, if it is not part of the curriculum in schools, do you think that racial equality should be taught as a subject? And if so, at what level should it begin? And who should the educators be for the subject?
Oh.
Interesting.
Thank you, Jason.
I would always come back to the same thing I've always genuinely believed, which is I think the purpose of education is to prepare people to take their place within society. Well, that's one of its purposes. And I think there's a toolkit that we all need to be armed with in terms of being in society. And I think in terms of we talk about different types of literacy, and I think being racially literate is really, really important. And I think at the earliest opportunity, people need to be prepared and understand that language so that they can equip themselves with the tools they need to navigate society. Because what we have is people passing through primary, secondary, tertiary, further higher education, going into the labour market, going into society, and they actually don't have the language to navigate a multicultural or multi-ethnic or multiracial society. So I do think, like any language, at the earliest opportunities when you pick it up, if you try and pick that language up when you're older, if we try and learn a new language now, at the respective ages we're at now, there'll be some difficulty in doing that. And I think there is an opportunity for people to learn that at a really young age, and it become kind of really embedded within their vernacular or lexicon, and it just becomes as tacit as breathing. Because I think to try and unlearn some of those ways of thinking when you're older is particularly difficult, and I think that's a huge contributor to the kind of xenophobic discourse that is kind of saturated and situated neatly within political correctness or the abandonment of it. You know, that kind of freedom of speech is something that people abuse, and I think they abuse it because they don't necessarily have the literacy to navigate intersectional dialogue. I think that's hugely important.
Right. Don't forget the question, right? It said something that racial equality be taught. Well, as a subject, I would say no. But I would say that the teachers need to be trained in racial equality, or really as a subject. And in training the teachers would be inclusive in what they teach. That's what I'm saying.
Yes, I think it's great that you'd have science, geography, racial equality. It should just be an integral part of learning good manners. The kid that attacked me when I was 8 years old was about my age, maybe a little bit older. And don't forget, when the teachers in the classroom said, "Bring in your favourite gollywog," it was the teachers that said it to the children. So, be respectful of people's colour and gender or whatever. It's just basic good decency. Sometimes you come across a white person who goes, "I can't understand racism," and you find that they can't understand it because they're being brought up completely non-racist. And so it's got to start at a very early level, and it shouldn't really be a subject. It shouldn't be. I mean, it is as we get older, and like you say, we've got to unlearn all this stuff or teach people how to unlearn all the stuff they've got. But it shouldn't be, and it wouldn't be if we started earlier. I don't think we need a class on it.
I think there probably could be classes. And I think that some of the times when we have these conversations about anti-racism and talking about racism, we feel like it has to be really difficult, uncomfortable, heavy-handed. Our children are going to be traumatized. I have a 3-year-old niece, and if you see the wide range of children's books that are out there that deal with difficult subjects in an age-appropriate way that is fun and engaging, it lets us know we can have this. They can be age-appropriate. They can be something that children find enjoyable to learn about. We have to find enjoyable ways to talk about Henry VIII. He was a divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded. They found ways to try and make this engaging for young people. One book that my niece read was about this fox who saw his reflection and was scared, and it was talking about when you're nice to other people, they're nice back. It's trying to teach people things, and I think that can definitely happen in schools. We just have to not be afraid of it and just do it in ways that ways that can be for children for enjoyable. When you're adult, it all becomes a bit more complicated. But if we're talking about the first 7 years of the most defining and informing character, we need to start early.
Spot on. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, panelists. This has been a great conversation. I've loved every second of it, and I just want to thank everyone for being a part of today. It's been a really thought-provoking conversation, which is exactly what I had hoped for. So again, thank you for everyone that turned up today.